From the Sky News Centre, this is Paul Murray Live.
Thank you, Chris Kenny. Thank you, Tim Blair. And there is a lot to get to tonight here on Paul Murray Live. Thank you so much for watching. We'll get to a big debate in a moment or two's time. But first, the sigh of relief that you heard Eastern Daylight Time at 2:30 this afternoon was the good news. The Reserve Bank has decided not to raise interest rates. Or, as the media would have it,
the Reserve Bank has gifted Australians some Christmas relief, keeping the official cash rate on hold.
A Christmas reprieve for borrowers, with the Reserve Bank leaving the official interest rate on hold today.
Borrowers are ending the year with some good news of sorts. The Reserve Bank has decided to leave official interest rates on hold.
Yes, interest rates have not gone up for a whole 30 days since the last time that they went up. And now that the federal government has rigged the way that the Reserve Bank will have its meetings into the future, a whole new group of people will make the decision in February, and then they won't meet every week. They'll be meeting every month. They'll be meeting every 6 weeks, meaning only 8 times rather than 11 times, which has been the long-standing practice. But of course, they want to avoid interest rate rises. So if there's different people making the decisions and they're meeting fewer times, then perhaps interest rates won't go up. Of course, Grim Jim, the great passenger of the Australian economy, remember, goes missing when the news is bad, holds a press conference when the news is good. Well, he was there to tell you that everything is awesome. He is living in Legoland this December.
This is welcome news for people who are already stretched enough. The last thing that people needed at Christmas time was another rate rise. And so I think this decision today from the Reserve Bank will be met with sighs of relief right around Australia.
Now, forgive me, firstly, for saying the same thing that Grim Jim did about the sigh of relief, but secondly, forgive me for maybe not having the balloons fall from the sky and confetti cannons going off on the set. You see, the current situation when it comes to interest rates, yes, didn't get any worse. But dare I say, like a python that's strangling you, or in this case, Homer Simpson, it's still strangling you. Sure, it's not as tight as it could be if it decided to get tighter, but it's still too tight. Because you see, remember, these are the highest interest rates that we have had in 12 years. Now, while it feels like a moment ago, when I say something like 12 years ago, let me put it into some perspective. In 2011, Julia Gillard was the Prime Minister. Well, that feels like 2 seconds ago. But what if I told you we've had 5 different Prime Ministers since interest rates were this high back in 2011? What if I told you the number 1 movie in 2011 was the second of the final of the Harry Potters, with Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2. That's the last time interest rates were this high. And the last time interest rates were this high, packed to the rafters, was still winning Logies on Channel 7. So the point is, while, yes, it didn't get worse today, it didn't get any better. So while the politicians and the media want to say, a gift for homeowners this evening, as things didn't get any worse, that's a pretty low bar for what we expect in terms of help when it comes to the economy. Now, I've shown you these numbers repetitively because I want it to be seen by those that are making the decisions in Canberra that the average Australian, and the reason I keep talking about the python and the reason we're the Homer Simpson in this analogy, and not just because it's one big bloke on the telly talking about another big bloke on the telly, the reality is that for people who have $500,000 that they're trying to pay off, since this government came to power, since these interest rates, the python is taking $13,500 extra than it did before this government came to power. $750,000 loan, that's basically the average for Australians. They've had to find an extra $21,000. And if you're paying off more than $1 million, it's at least 30 grand that you've had to find since the interest rates started to go up. So forgive me. Forgive me if I don't fall for the government talking point that we got a gift today. We're still being strangled. But for want of a better term, our captors have decided not to increase the pain. So therefore, please be thankful. That's a slightly bizarre relationship to be having with your government. And forgive me if I don't believe that this government, which apparently is talking about cost of living all day, every day, and we talk about it at the cabinet table like you talk about it at the kitchen table, because we're like you. Okay. apart from the highest pay rise that in 10 years, that's what they got. Apart from, of course, the guaranteed employment in the Senate. If you're one of those backbench losers that'll have no place to play, or someone like Lydia Thorpe who's going to sit around for 6 years getting $1.2 million. Oh, yes, they very much care about cost of living. So forgive me if I don't think that a Labor senator trying to change the subject like we showed you last night, Murray Watt, not passing a law about Christmas hams, but instead he says, my position is we should ask the supermarkets to freeze the cost of Christmas hams because Christmas hams is very important. Please, forgive me if I don't actually think that that's action on what we all know to be the issue, which of course is inflation. But again, Grim Jim, desperate to make it seem that because the squeeze is not as tight as it could be, but it's still as tight as it was last week, apparently again in Legoland, everything is awesome.
We are making welcome and encouraging progress in the fight against inflation.
Now, again, this is all spin that the Canberra, you know, all the yes voters who live in the ACT and talk about politics for a living. All the people desperate to find a way to, break the downward spiral of the government. Oh, they're turning the corner. They're turning the corner. Now, the Treasurer says that to you today, when, as we showed you last night, consumer surveys are telling us that an extreme majority of Australians now are under some form of cost of living pressure, with the best part of almost 80% of people saying that they are in financial stress right now. But if you don't believe that graph, if you don't believe what I've been saying, let's turn our attention to a sector that this government should be supporting with the $20 billion surplus that it has. Now, OK, obviously they're not going to cut fuel prices. They should. But at this particular time when more people are lining up around the block, literally around the block, for things like food to come out of charities, so, as the Turbans for Australia charity told us, it means that's $80 they don't have to spend on food, which means they can spend the $80 they'd otherwise spend on food, on things like medicine or trying to pay the power bills. People are seriously doing it tough. And you would think that a federal government with a $20 billion surplus would be able to carve off $1 billion for relief for charities this Christmas, but no, none of that. Instead, we learned today, and well done to the reporting, I believe this is in the Courier Mail, where Queensland, charities I want to focus in on here in a second. Salvation Army Queensland is reporting about 25% down in terms of the number of donations that they are getting, and that's just 3 weeks before Christmas, despite the fact that there is a huge amount of demand for what they do. And then there's this heartbreaking situation. Rural charity Drought Angels said the number of people that are needing help has doubled, with more inquiries coming through. But how's this? It comes after a truck with $250,000 of donations for the charity Drought Angels had been stolen. It was stolen on Sunday afternoon from their Logan depot. The boss, Jason Law, that's the bloke you can see on your screen now, despite the fact that they have lost, somebody stole, some lowlife, some grub, some piece of work, stole $250,000 worth of donations for a charity that helps regional people. He still says we're committed to giving farmers money, especially over the Christmas time. So what this means is that anything we're going to sell and generate income has put a massive dent financially in this. It's the toughest time for communities around Australia, let alone those living on the land who also feel isolated at this time. It's really hard to get the family together if they don't feel isolated. $250,000 worth of stuff that charity, Drought Angels, would have been able to get to people in regional communities to make Christmas a little bit better. A little bit better. Now, as you know, the focus on this show this week is trying to raise money for Humpty Dumpty, in particular our trip to Port Lincoln. So I'll get into chapter and verse on that in a second. But if you can help us with that, but also you might be able to help us with Drought Angels, let's try and send some big money their way. Now, maybe next week we'll focus on them hardcore between now and Christmas, but they've lost $250,000 worth of donations. So you can help them with dollars or effort or something else. Go to their website, donate.droughtangels, all one word, .org.au. Donate.droughtangels.org.au, or just go droughtangels.org.au, and that'll take you to where you can help them out. Meantime, the federal government says, oh, we're doing everything we possibly can. Really, are you? You could start by giving Drought Angels $250,000 to replace what some person stole from them. Meantime, to the other theory, the other subject that we so often talk about here, and that's other people's money. How the people in charge could not care less what they do with your money because it is all for their political game. It is all for their power game. And yes, 2 months ago, Australia made it very clear when it came to voting on the voice, spending more money to invent a brand new layer of bureaucracy, paying a whole collection of people an unknown amount of money to be able to do radio national interviews. Well, Australia, we all know, didn't just say no, it said hell no. All bar Teal and the ACT. No, no, no. Yet, we know that the Prime Minister and his hapless and useless Indigenous Affairs Minister, Linda Burney, has slowly but surely been trying to find a way to move through this embarrassment for them, but more importantly, waste of $450 million. So they say, oh, well, the only thing that got defeated was the voice. We're still pushing on with treaty and Makarrata. So the assumption was, amongst the lefty media that was telling you had to vote yes and Australia would vote yes and wouldn't even count people potentially who were voting no, instead sort of move them around into undecided for months after months after months. Well, they thought that polling would come out and say, you know what, OK, voice, not OK. Treaty and Makarrata or truth-telling, that's what people are into. The only problem is the Channel 9 newspapers, when they did this poll, it showed that even less people than voted for the voice are in favour of a Commonwealth treaty or the establishment of a truth-telling commission. Now, that's significant to note, because despite the fact that the Australian people said no to the voice, and despite the fact that the only poll that I can see that's been done post-voice says hell no by even bigger margins to the other two of the three demands of the Uluru Statement, then it is with notice that we pay attention to what is happening at the state level. Because in many ways the states are trying to be out-progressing each other on this issue. Now, regardless of the fact that the good people of Victoria also voted no, a surprise to me, but still, they voted no in that referendum, the Andrews now Allen government had already set up a process of their own version of a voice, their own version of a truth-telling and their own version of a treaty. Now, their own version of the Truth-Telling Commission, which you think would be about trying to inform people of the historic wrongs or to be able to turn around and say, well, this thing happened in 1824 and this thing you weren't aware of that happened in 1789, that would be the purpose of it. Oh, no, 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 no. This is by which the new model where we need to change the entire criminal justice system, because that's the suggestion of the truth-telling people, the unelected people who are telling the government exactly what should happen, and that's not even their version of the Indigenous People's Assembly. And then on the treaty side of things, did you hear this today? That the Victorian government has decided that the people who will play umpire through this process are going to be paid $400,000 a year. $400,000 a year. Now, of course, as we know, Indigenous communities are not just all one mob, multiple groups within groups and groups within areas. And the Herald Sun's been doing the leading here. In fact, just yesterday they told us that members of the Treaty Authority panel selected to negotiate with the elders and the Indigenous community could be paid a salary up to $380,000 a year, plus the expenses if they work full-time. That's how you get to almost $400,000. The Herald Sun can reveal that members of the Treaty Authority panel picked to negotiate with elders and the Indigenous community. Again, salary $380,000 plus a year's expenses. Jacinta Price, when asked about this, says it's unbelievable that at a time when Australians are struggling with the cost of housing, food, fuel, the Victorian government is going to spend $2 million a year further dividing Australians. Well done, Jacinta Price. Remember, if you vote for Peter Dutton the next election, you get Jacinta Price as the Indigenous Affairs Minister. One of the many reasons why I think they're going to get better in the polls, not worse. How can the Labor government look at struggling Victorians in the eye and justify this utterly ridiculous waste of money? So remember, I mean, you can imagine how much money is going to be involved in this whole process, right? Compensation, special taxes, all the rest of it. When the umpires of the process are going to get paid $400,000. So what does it tell you about how the machine just marches on, regardless of what the public thinks? When the public had a chance to talk about these sorts of issues, they rejected them not just nationwide, but also in Victoria. But nothing stops in the process because, bugger it, it's happening anyway. But of course, the effective one-party state, that is Victoria, the soft media down there, the hopelessness of the Liberal Party, means this garbage will keep rolling on. And of course, you continue to pay for it. But that's the joy of spending other people's money. Meantime, as we know, and as you know by now, not one, not two, three, in fact, reporting from Sherry Markson, a fourth former detainee has now been arrested, alleged to have committed multiple crimes. Now, we all know how this works. The High Court made its decision quite a few weeks ago. The decision then, of course, was to remove any and everyone, all 140-something odd people who were the long-term detainees, despite the fact that the actual wording of the High Court decision means they could have just let the one person out and then forced the 140 to go back and go through the process to delay it as long as possible. But we all know how hopeless Claire O'Neill is, how hopeless the Immigration Minister Andrew Giles is, the Home Affairs Minister, Clueless Claire, as we call her. Now, remember, these are the people who turned around and made a whole situation where they let everyone out despite the fact that the case was only about one person. They said you couldn't possibly legislate to deal with what's happened. But, of course, they made up new laws and they have just passed a whole bunch of them through the Senate today. They didn't expect to lose the case, but then tried to tell us that they'd been planning for months just in case. But proving that that was a lie as well. As we know, people were let out without visas, no security was there once they ended up getting into the hotels, no tax. But when all else fails, what does this government do? Blame Peter Dutton.
NZYQ would not even have been here were it not for the incompetence of the Leader of the Opposition.
The Leader of the Opposition's personal intervention meant that he was allowed to remain in Australia until the day the High Court made its decision.
Order,
this ultimately is his mess.
Please. Even hardcore Labor supporters don't buy this one, which is why the polls are the way they are. The government thinks all of this magically goes away because they've finally got something passed through the Senate. It doesn't. Because the court cases involving the people that we've been talking about for the past couple of days that we've been feared may well end up in this situation for the past few weeks. Well, all of that drags on into January, and whether the government likes it or not, they will not be able to change the subject. Meantime, Penny Wong in the Senate today during their question time, well, when she was being pushed on some of the details here, especially after, as we told you last night, that a person who had been in detention had been released and is now accused of indecent assault, no plea entered, back in jail until January. Well, of course, her response today was to blame Peter Dutton.
Every single one of these 148 people arrived here before the election. Right. Every single one of these people was still here because Mr Dutton failed to do his job. Correct. The government inherited laws that the High Court has ruled unconstitutional, and we have worked around the clock to fix the mess we've inherited.
You see, the smirk in the voice is, ho, 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 I got him going in question time. Well, guess what? Those of us outside the chamber, those of us that are paying for that circus, see that for exactly what it is, which is just a desperate attempt to duck shove, to desperately change the conversation. Oh, we're really in power, but we're not really in power because it's really about the previous government? Come off it. Meantime, the actual big piece of information that not too many people talked about today was the role this bloke had in the process. So we know that the Home Affairs Minister was useless. We know the Immigration Minister was useless. Well, now we learn that the Attorney General was actually quite useful. Oh no, not to the government who was arguing against the bloke getting out of detention. Instead, he was helpful to the bloke who was trying to get out of detention. Very interestingly, some reporting in the Turnbull Times today, very sympathetic to those who have been let out. Just have a look at any of their stories, look at where they put the emphasis. Oh, no, it's all about the drug possession situation in New South Wales, not the indecent assault situation, alleged in both cases in South Australia. That Mark Dreyfus personally allowed the Human Rights Commission to argue on the behalf of the bloke who was trying to defeat the government in the High Court. Now, it's not the first time that somebody has asked the Human Rights Commission to get involved, but they can't get involved unless the Attorney General of the day agrees that they are allowed to get involved, which means we actually had a situation of taxpayer-funded lawyers for the Human Rights Commission arguing against the taxpayer-funded lawyers arguing on the part of the Department of Home Affairs. Now, as I say, it's not the first time. In fact, people have tried to do this in the past, but previous Attorney Generals in previous governments, like Christian Porter in the last Liberal government, said no. And miraculously, none of these matters ended up getting to the High Court. None of these matters ended up being successful in the High Court. Geez, I wonder what is slightly different this time around, apart from an Attorney General who clearly was doing an elbow and having it both ways. Meantime, the Attorney General himself has actually blown a giant hole in the toughest laws of all time that have been introduced. Remember, Clueless Claire O'Neill trying to tell you that all day, every day. Well, the reality is that, as I told you, many of these laws, while, sure, good to be in place, the reality is it's Swiss cheese and most of it isn't going to put anyone back behind bars. They can talk tough, they can make it look like they're doing something, but the reality is that the extreme majority of those that have come out are out. And while, yes, it is just a handful right now of people that are accused of doing something bad since they left, the reality is, the numerical likelihood is that we're going to end up in a pretty bad situation here. And in fact, actually, reporting today from Sky News quite correctly says that only 2 people have been locked up under the version of the laws that have been amended for this particular situation. So the Attorney-General himself has turned around and admitted that he can't put most of these people back behind bars. And even the laws they are trying to dress up as new laws that will definitely get on top of this, well, guess what? Only 2 people so far have been able to be put back in some sort of immigration detention, and those were people who were high-risk terrorists. Now, interestingly, after the situation of the gentleman that we told you about last night, there has, of course, been great pressure on the government, and rightly so. And we know the Prime Minister, thunderingly loud on so many issues, the one who promised to always be responsible and not be like the other guy who just goes missing when times are tough. Well, he's had 0 to say on this. Literally, the tumbleweeds. Oh no, he went to a book launch yesterday for John Brown, that's our mate who we had in the studio talking about an old-fashioned way Labor used to do things, but there was no questions from the press. Quick, launch the book, ha ha ha, bugger off out the back door. Nothing to say at all. Now, interestingly, what is worth noting here is why this gentleman, again, back before the courts for an alleged situation, why was he in a public hotel? Who made the decision that he was to go in that part of the community in South Australia, not in this part or not in a more remote part? Who knows? Well, somebody who does know is the Assistant Commissioner of Police in South Australia. Now, he gave a very, very long press conference today that if you were paying attention, there was lots of talk about how good the system was and how hard everyone's been working and how we got all this up to date in the best part of 4 weeks. And then someone actually started to ask a question. Have a listen to the question, have a listen to the answer, and I think you'll know that despite the confident appearance, it's not just the Minister who's got no idea what's going on.
The State Police are not involved in the housing, in the immediate or long-term housing of these people. That's something that you need to speak to the Commonwealth about.
Who's making the decisions? Police are in an awful bind here. They're in a scenario where they're being asked to enforce the decisions of other people while, obviously, there's a level of autonomy that these people now have to decide where they go. Watch this space, it only gets worse before it gets better. But what about that? The Attorney-General personally signing off on the lawyers who helped this situation begin in the first place. Oh, but it's all Peter Dutton's fault. Yeah, okay. As you know, the UN Climate Talk Fest, the one that used to be in Glasgow a couple of years ago, well, that, of course, is now taking its place in the absolute heart of conservative attitudes, modern attitudes. That, of course, is the UAE. Now, Chris Bowen is there representing Australia, and I can't help but think that this Prime Minister is being treated slightly different than the previous Prime Minister. You see, this is the second time in a row that the Australian Prime Minister has not attended this international UN Talkfest. But remember what the current Prime Minister said about the former Prime Minister, who was planning to do exactly the same thing about a UN climate conference. Of course, it was Albo criticising ScoMo for maybe not going to an event that he himself has not gone to for the past 2 years.
The Prime Minister should attend the Glasgow conference and he should represent Australia. If he doesn't, it's because he's embarrassed about Australia's position.
But of course he doesn't have to go. You can send Bowen or you can send Wong because it's not really that important. But of course Australia is currently bidding for the opportunity, just like the Olympics or a Commonwealth Games that we might get but then give up on, to have one of these international climate conferences here. Now, presumably Albo will go to that. Now, I understand it's a vexed issue for the Prime Minister. You see, if he went to this conference, I and plenty of other people would, of course, be calling him Airbus Albo, But the reality is that he's kind of screwed either way. You see, if he went, he would be further adding to the problem that is Toto 1 and Airbus Albo. But if he doesn't go, then he kind of looks like a hypocrite. So you choose which one you think he is, because either reflect poorly on the Prime Minister. Meantime, of course, as you know, this government's very aggressive when it comes to an anti-nuclear stance, suggesting nuclear power never allowed in the country. But amazingly, a teenager was able to get an answer out of the French president about whether or not Australia should be lifting its nuclear ban. Now, remember when people were getting awards for, like, Scoop of the Year because they were able to ask the French president a question? Well, clearly it's not that hard. A teenager was able to do it.
I hope that you will manage to lift the ban. I mean, nuclear energy is absolutely a necessity to succeed.
Yes.
For carbon neutrality in 2050.
Certainly.
I mean, now it's with the control of international to make agency and with the best possible regulation. I think this is a fair and a good decision to relaunch nuclear capacities.
So nuclear energy might be a way of reducing greenhouse gases. What was the name of Al Gore's film? Oh, that's right. An Inconvenient Truth, perhaps. Meantime, this government, of course, is obsessed with trying to build an entirely new electricity grid to replace the one that works, because it will make them look better when they host the international conference of the leaders who may or may not turn up, because like our Prime Minister, it's kind of optional. Well under the Daily Mail, because they turned around and actually had a look and put together a graph about the types of destruction to the planet, to the earth, that's being done by the creation of all of these new renewable projects everywhere. Now, I know you won't be able to squint and follow everything there, but the destruction of 1.5 hectares of koala habitat is happening right now at a place called Clark Creek in Queensland. Meantime, the wedge-tailed eagle, what is that, 2, 4, 6 of them have been killed by a wind project in New South Wales. And then as we start to move down towards, a little further down, well, there's been plenty of falcons and bats and crest tails that have also died as a result of the endless push towards, you know, the better stuff. And finally on this one, interesting to note that there's a little bit of pressure on the government to increase the carbon price. You mean we have a carbon price in Australia? Oh, that's right, we actually do. Now, we told you this at the time, Matt Canavan made it clear at the time, and now there's suggestions that this price must be increased in order for Australia to hit its green dreams. Except, again, a little bit like Albo in the optional attendance of the climate conferences, what did Casanova say in 2021? No, an economy-wide carbon price isn't part of our policy development. But then there is a carbon price that apparently we need to increase to be able to meet our global targets for a meeting about whether or not our Prime Minister will or won't attend. These people play us for fools, but we're not. We stand up, we call them out, and we gladly will. All right, quick break. Back with more. Plenty more to talk about, including the government in getting a deeper mess when it comes to the detainees, and so much more here on Paul Murray Live. Great debate coming up. Don't go anywhere. Holly Hughes, Nicholas Rees. Oh, yeah, and Nicholas Rees and Peter Dutton. They're on a common moment at the moment. Hopefully it's about this bloke. Now, bit of housekeeping. The toilets are located over there, back around the corner and at the very end of the function room. But again, a bit of housekeeping. Normally at the end of the show is when I'm quickly making a little reference to something that we are doing every month when we go out and do Our Town. And that is that in Australia, unbelievably, if you have ever had the misfortune, like I have had, like way too many people have had, of ending up going to an intensive care for babies and little kids, you start to look around and you start to notice that a lot of the equipment in the room is donated. Now, it's disgraceful, and yes, there should be the billions of dollars that are taken on taxes means we don't have to get donations, but the reality is we do have to get donations, and that's why every single month we want to get together with the people from the Humpty Dumpty Foundation to find the medical equipment that regional hospitals need so that babies that are born and end up in a version of intensive care in regional hospitals can stay in the towns where their families are. Now, in the case of Port Lincoln, that is the best part of what, almost 7-hour drive to Adelaide? It's a bloody long way. And sick kids can get sicker when they are being transported. So, every month we're going to try to talk to the local hospital in the area that we're doing our town, and we're going to try to ask them, what do you need? Well, they need about $47,000 worth of stuff. Now, we're not going to do what we did last time, which was just open the floodgates and everyone who was giving us incredible donations, and in the space of a week, we got like $110,000. So I want to try to push this out across each of the different months. So if you're a South Australian and you're watching, you need to step up. If you're somebody who's got maybe a little bit extra and you'd like to put it in this area, it's all tax deductible. You know all the games, all of the deals with this. So $47,000. Now, I've made an appeal for this a couple of times and we're about $5,000. I appreciate everyone who has given us money to this point. But I've got until Sunday. And I want to try to get this out of the way as fast as possible, as soon as possible. So anyone who is watching right now who is thinking of, you know what am I going to get? Insert someone for Christmas. You know what? A donation to this cause. And there's a million different great causes, including what we were mentioning before with the Drought Angels situation, but we'll deal with that next week. Right now, I need you to help me, help the babies and the parents of Port Lincoln. You can do so, humpty.org.au/regional fundraiser or 1300 Humpty. Write this number down, pen and paper. Pause the telly if you need to. 1300 486 789. People are at Humpty Dumpty tonight to take your call, to take your donation. $5, $500, $5,000, whatever you got. Kyle, you already did your work last time, so it's not all on you. But to everyone watching, if you can, we need 47, and I believe we can get 47. Ideally, right now. 1300 486 789. In the meantime, while you are looking for those donations, let's continue a conversation with, well, a bloke who's raised, the best part of $100,000 himself for his charity of choice, that being Movember and Men's Health. The freshly shaven Nicholas Rees, back to his youthful self, of course, as the Deputy Lord Mayor of Melbourne, and we'll get to a little connection you have to Peter Dutton on that cause in a second. And the wonderful Holly Hughes, who is always resplendent with the pearls on. And I noticed in question time today that you were getting told off for how loud you are in the Senate, and as you've told us before, that's because of your theatrical training.
Absolutely. It's all my training and how to project my voice beautifully across the chamber.
Oh, listen to that
And
diction.
I'm just trying to help. I'm just trying to help, Paul.
Well,
and I must say, Nick, you look very handsome tonight. I'm glad that piece of smudge on your lip's gone. You look much better tonight, guys.
You sound like his mum. Like you've just walked in and licked your hanky and said, "Oh, I'm going to help you out here, son." You're not his mum, you're his mate.
Well, I'm a mum of three, so, sometimes I slip into that mode.
All right, well, I'm concerned if we have to do the maths here on this situation, but anyway, Nicholas is eternally 21, as are yourself. So let's talk here, before we get to the situation involving our borders, because it's well ventilated, and certainly everyone watching in the past few hours. We'll get to that in a second. But Nicholas, Victoria voted no when it came to the voice. Pretty strongly, right? It wasn't a little bit, it wasn't an inch. Yet, of course, the treaty and Makarrata process continues on. Now, this is all state-based stuff, but you would have thought that someone might pump the brakes somewhere. Instead, no. The people who will be the umpires of the treaty process, that will not be done across the entire state, but region by region, section by section, they're going to get paid $400,000. Now, it feels tone deaf to me. How does it feel to you?
Well, there's a couple of things to unpack there, Paul, and great to be on the show with you as well, Holly. And yes, it was a filthy mo, and it's been removed there now. So no more quips about my follicle challenges, please. But look, back to the Victorian situation. Look, let's not forget the Daniel Andrews government got re-elected at the last state election with a record majority, and they had a very clear promise around progressing truth and treaty in Victoria, and that's what they're going about doing. And, treaty processes are not an easy thing to do. You need good people on the job, and that's what the now Jacinta Allen government are doing as well. And I agree with you, these people do seem to me to be being paid very high salaries, but they've got a big job and they're getting paid a big salary for a big job.
Holly,
as long as it aligns up with, the public sector wage rates and it's all been, had the ruler run over it in that respect, I think it's okay.
Yeah, but Holly, let's be serious here. Surely there's some retired judges, there's some former King's Councils, Queens, someone else can perform this function. Look, the Victorian government wants to push on with the process that when the representative body was voted upon by its people, it was a clear no. Nicholas says, of course, it was one of the many reasons why they end up winning an election. The joy, of course, of having many things in an election campaign is that you can pretend that there was a complete mandate for this one thing, but of course we know that it ends up being the choice between the lesser of two evils, the general package, you take it. But when the issue around Indigenous affairs was voted on, increasing the load on the public of either representative bodies or things like treaties and truth and all the rest of it, Victorians said no. Are you surprised that this is happening? And how the hell does it cost $400,000?
Well, I'm assuming that's $400,000 per person that's working in this as well.
Yes.
So that's almost twice what a member of the House of Representatives or Senator gets paid. So, I'm not sure whether their job is twice as hard as what I do, but I would find that surprising. It's clearly a great gig if you can get it. But as you rightly point out, for Nicholas to say that the Andrews government was re-elected on the back of promising this would be part of their approach to government, I'm really not sure that many people cast their vote in a state election based on the fact there would be truth-telling and treaty throughout the state. I think there were probably other factors at play. This was probably not the predominant one, and I think it is incredibly tone-deaf that Victoria is not only persisting with this, but that in a cost of living crisis, and when Victoria is fundamentally broke, they are paying people this sort of money to perform a service that through the referendum they could see all Victorians don't support.
Yeah, exactly. All right, guys, a couple of other ones before we get to the real meat and potatoes that people want us to talk about, and that's the detainees. I'm just trying to offer up something slightly different than everyone else tonight. Judith Sloan wrote an interesting piece today that there's going to be a political consequence that's going to start to come on this huge amount of migration that's coming into the country. Holly, it doesn't take somebody of the big brain that is Judith Sloan to come to that conclusion, but she said, among other things, immigration is a policy area that requires immediate action, lest the large numbers of migrants, both coming and staying, continue to fuel the housing crisis. Now, that's been the whole issue here, is that, the Guardian will want to turn around and say that it's some sort of dog whistle about racism. Garbage. I don't care where you come from, what you believe in, as long as we all recommit to the awesomeness of Australia, the openness of Australia. But the issue is when currently 121 people look at every available rental property in Ipswich, and people are lined up around the block, or people are paying $400 for a spare room in Melbourne, more people to the queue ain't great. Do you agree that this becomes a potential political issue in the next 12 months?
Look, it's not only a political issue when it comes to the housing crisis, and you're completely right. When you're having issues with getting Australians into housing, whether it's to purchase homes or to rent them, we are having a significant crisis when it comes to housing at the moment. We don't have enough housing to house our own people. And when that is being impacted by thousands of new migrants arriving every week, that is, of course, adding to the housing issue. But the bigger issue here is this is aiding the homegrown inflation that we're currently seeing. And this inflation that that's going across the Australian community that impacts every Australian, it's the inflationary pressure that's adding to the, yes, we didn't get a mortgage rate rise today, the cash rate didn't increase, but there's a real chance it's going to increase in February. And it's because of homegrown inflation, which is only being added to by these overcooked migration numbers. And look, I'm not saying we don't need skilled migrants. We absolutely do need some skilled migrants to come in. But we are being inundated with both international students and unskilled workers, and the government could step in today to reduce those numbers, which would take the pressure off housing, not immediately, but you would see an easing on housing, but you would see an almost immediate impact on inflationary pressures, and that's where everyone is really struggling.
Yeah, I mean, Nicholas, we're in a scenario now where we've already been told by nasty Nikki Sava that, this is a dog whistle, this is racism if we go there, evil Dutton's going to talk about it. But the reality is that more people into a system that has already got a series of pressures in it is only going to make those pressures greater. Now, I know we'll have a conversation about whom some of the people are, skilled migrants, and there's obviously failures that exist in us, frankly, sending, in my view, too many kids to university as opposed to into trades over the past few years. But let's just talk about the political issue here. You've got your ear to the ground. You know some of the people inside the Labor Party, fairly obviously. Are they telling you that this is going to become an issue? Because I think that it is an issue. I think it's going to become a bigger issue. And I think that whether the polite people want to talk about it or not, it's going to be an issue.
Yeah, let me begin by acknowledging that, yes, it is an issue, but as most things are in political debate, it's more complicated than that. There's, a reality and then there's a perception. The reality is that Australia has been a very successful, modern country off the back of a large immigration program. As a result of COVID, our borders got closed for a couple of years. A lot of people left. We're about 1 million people down on where we otherwise would have been. It was the last previous government who committed to increasing the immigration rate. This government has kept it going. We've had about 450,000 people arrive to the year to March, had a birth rate sort of tick up as well. You put that together, you've got 600,000 extra people in Australia. That's the reality of the numbers. We're still playing catch-up on where we otherwise would have been. It's also the case that, you still can't get somebody to fix your garage door or help you with your renovation or plenty of other things around you because there's extreme tightness in the Australian labour market. So, it's not like immigrants are coming to this country and taking people's jobs. There's a labour force shortage in this country at the moment, which people are experiencing every day.
A lot of Australians can have a conversation ranking which films they like of Orson Welles as opposed to knowing how to fix that damn door.
Well, that's a good point as well. And this is where we get to the political line. It's been run out by Holly Hughes and others. She's taking us through the Liberal talking points there. According to them, the immigration rate, which remember they introduced, is creating housing affordability pressures and also causing inflation to be higher than it otherwise would be. And to the extent that that is a simple lie, it's a simple lie that's being told by the opposition. It beats the complex truth that explains what's really going on behind some of these things. Let me give you one example, Paul. In my municipality, the City of Melbourne, we have approved over 20,000 new apartments to be built. Guess what? They're approved, they've got the stamp to go, but they're not being built. Why aren't they being built? Because developers face really high development costs. Cost of construction's really high. Interest rates have gone up. The financial model has become more challenging. The risk around development, banks aren't lending. So guess what? Homes aren't being built. That's the complex truth behind the housing
I agree
debate.
with you,
but,
and all the students
but the immigration lie is a
2 days a week at Melbourne Uni, all Melbourne Uni students have to pick up the tools. I agree with the policy. I think it's a good idea that all Melbourne Uni students should have to pick up the tools as well. All right, quick break, back with more in a moment. A reminder about Humpty Dumpty, okay? I want to try to raise this money, as much of it as we possibly can. I'm not going to bash you over the head about this over and over again, but I do want to do it every month as a lasting legacy, not just turning up and having fun with the TV show, but leaving something behind. Humpty.org.au/regional fundraiser, or give what you can right now. 1300 486 789. 1300 486 789. Back with the gang in a sec. Thank you very much. On our way towards $7,000. Let's get there as fast as we possibly can when it comes to Humpty Dumpty. I really do appreciate it. Let's continue the conversation right now. Nicholas Rees, Holly Hughes. Okay, let's get to it. Where the hell is the Prime Minister? This was apparently the one that was going to turn up, be responsible, be transparent, all the rest of it. Of course, nowhere to be seen. Ministers, nowhere to be seen today. Disgraceful behaviour from Penny Wong in the Senate. It's all Peter Dutton's fault. Holly, this situation gets worse by the day. And also we learn that the Attorney General is now involved in all of it, okaying the Human Rights Commission to argue the opposite side of what his government was arguing, meaning I think we know which side he was really on.
Yeah, and look, this is just completely in line with the way this government acts. They talk about they want to ensure that we're developing as a nation, that we're allowing our resources to grow, that we're growing our economy, but at the same time giving $10 million extra to the Environmental Defender's Office to object to every sort of resource plan that we put forward or that the country tries to move forward on. These guys have absolutely no idea when it comes to borders, to national security. Just in the last couple of weeks, the complete disgrace around the High Court decision, the fact that they released 147 people, one who was impacted by the High Court decision, the rest of them, not so sure. They may not have needed to be released because this government did not wait for the reasons to be put out by the High Court. So we now have 147 people in our community, 3 of whom I understand are now back behind bars because of alleged crimes they've committed in the last couple of days. But 147 were let out into the community. We don't know where they are. These are pedophiles, these are murderers, these are rapists. We have one contract killer that we know of. Yet this government saw fit to release them into the community, and they have done absolutely nothing. They have been caught asleep at the wheel. There was no legislation ready to go. It absolutely should have been ready to go. We've actually gone through migration tonight in the Senate, and that was because after question time, after the disgraceful behaviour of the ministers responsible for answering questions, Senator Birmingham called a suspension of standing orders so that we could put the migration bill up straight away, because they were playing politics, saying that somehow or other we weren't passing it when they hadn't even put it forward. So we are the ones that put it on the table tonight. I was actually sitting in the chair when it was going through the committee stage, which is when ministers and all the crossbench and everyone gets to ask questions of the minister, and the absolute duplicitous and quite frankly untrue answers that were delivered by the minister responsible were appalling. And it is just a complete and utter schmozzle, but it is a schmozzle that has an impact on the Australian community's safety. But where is Albanese? Where is O'Neill? Where is Giles? Are they all in witness protection? Because they haven't been out today.
Oh, the PM had a book launch yesterday, just no questions. I mean, again, Nicholas, we were told one of the many shining reasons, the reasons for a change of government was responsibility, transparency, all the rest of it, right? So let's not even have a conversation about anything but today. Today, no one was there. Today, no one was there when the news story had profoundly changed over the 24 hours. We weren't even talking about the High Court. We weren't even talking about the laws. No one spoke today. Do you want to give a free piece of advice to your Labor friends here about how to manage this stuff, and that always fronting up is the only option? Taking the one day on, one day off option might be great for public servants working from home, but when you're the Prime Minister or a minister, every day counts.
Well, I mean, come on, Paul, come on, Holly. This is Sky After Dark. This is the Straight Talk Express that people are tuned in to here. And I'm sorry, there are bigger questions to be answered than why did the Prime Minister not turn up to a press conference today? I mean, there are big questions for Peter Dutton to answer, aren't there, Holly? Like, let's not forget. Hold on. I've listened to you very patiently. I've listened to you very patiently. Okay. It's not the Straight Talk Express then. It's let's just put one side of the argument, is it?
Labor's talking points.
Okay.
Labor's
so
talking
these
points
people arrived. It's not the Straight Talk Express. It's just the Holly Hour, is it? Hey, these people arrived on Peter Dutton's watch. These people arrived under Peter Dutton's laws. And when I say his laws, when he was the minister. And now the High Court has interpreted his laws and said that they have to be let out. And now Labor is scrambling to fix things up through preventative detention laws. Pretty far-reaching. Quite some legal gymnastics been done, but they're doing what needs to be done to make Australians safe. And all you can do here, Holly, is come in here and say, why wasn't the Prime Minister in a press conference? You know why? Because he was working hard to keep Australians safe.
Oh, Nicholas, I love you, but you know that last one's garbage.
Here's the straws, Nick.
Right.
Let's just clutch at them, shall we?
I'm out of time, gang.
Mate,
I should have done it earlier.
This guy arrived when Bowen was Immigration Minister on a boat. Stop lying, Nicholas.
Correct. Now, I'll let that go there. I should have done it earlier. I should have done it, but I wanted to talk about something else because everyone else has had a big whack at this tonight. That's my mistake. Next time, we'll have the big fight much earlier. Thank you. Do appreciate it. Also, by the way, shout out Peter Dutton donated to the man with the now no mo. See, friends across the water. Must watch him on Paul Murray Live every now and then. Quick break, back with more in a sec. Sorry, I talked too long. Here's the late debate. Thank you for your donation. See you tomorrow.